By 1242, the crusade for Abyssinia was a success. The presence of two crusader states in Africa and Locondo in the Holy Land, Christendom successfully hemmed in the House of Islam, nearly barring them from the Mediterranean entirely. In 1243, wishing to further his father's vision of a secure English channel, Emperor Alexander IV Monad declared war on the Empire of France for the region of Normandy. Thus, beginning his reign with the promise of blood, he landed a force of 40,000 in Normandy and immediately began the assault upon the various castles there. They so completely devastated the area that Empress Agatha the Just Alary surrendered by the next year. Normandy was his, and France's access to the sea was thrown into question. In 1244, the empire still recovering from war, yet another secret plot to lower crown authority reared its head. The nobility were liable to become bored in times of peace and turn on their emperor. This plot, however, was different. The king of Nairn, King Ardgal Gwaine, one of the four lesser kings of Vannonia, pledged his support, bringing 20,000 men to bear. Having learned this through his spymaster, Alexander IV soon remembered his dynasty's history of never-ending revolts to lower crown authority after wars, the crown fighting to preserve primogeniture succession all the while, and this family history motivated action. However, before he could enact his plan of political overhaul, Alexander IV first had to embark on a year of imperial consensus building. In order to secure the changes he needed to safeguard the practice of primogeniture succession, he needed to secure the sworn support of certain key vassals and noble families. For that year, he redistributed land from some nobles to others, awarded some with special honors, granted crown funds to certain families for special local projects, and promised others tacit support for invasions and conquests of certain minor rivals. As such, in 1245, Emperor Alexander IV changed the feudal administration laws of Vannonia to a new set of later feudal nature, namely enshrining primogeniture succession no matter what happened to the crown authority. When this revolt league with an army of 85,000 threatened war, Emperor Alexander IV, ever the pragmatist, was the first emperor in the history of his house to voluntarily lower crown authority. Thinking they had won, the rebels stood down and returned home, only to find out that nothing had in fact changed, for the emperor wisely altered the myriad feudal laws that surrounded and buttressed primogeniture in his favor. He had caught them in a bureaucratic web of crown favors and family ties, the likes of which they would be unable to escape for a generation. Even King Ardgal of Nairn had been positioned against 5 other nobles within his own revolt league due to certain tax dues, property redistribution, and crown allowances. Such a thing caused the revolt league to fall apart, the first time a revolt had done so without war. On the 2nd of September 1247, while out visiting the countryside of Vannonia in the lesser kingdom of Cymru, Emperor Alexander IV was caught in a crossfire between 2 bands of mercenary archers fighting over a county war he himself had facilitated, and was killed by an arrow to the temple at the age of 34. His infant son, Emperor Alexander V Monad, ascended to the throne at the age of 1. In the east, in 1258, yet another federation was founded, the Galatia Federation, largely in response to the Mongol invaders nearby. In 1263, once claims were secured for the rest of the French coast by his reliable advisors, Emperor Alexander V set out to complete his grandfather's work and secure the channel for Vannonia. Of course, this work was only made possible by the machinations of his father, crafting a web of domestic intrigue and conflict that ensured his childhood was a peaceful one, and for 16 years it was indeed peaceful. War now came at his behest and on his terms, a powerful gift from his father. A huge force of 58,000 men was raised to face the French army of 50,000, who knew they were coming and understood their dread mission. If they were to ever outdo or even contest the Occitans for the rich Gaulish region, they needed access to that coastline which Vannonia designed to steal away from them. Luckily for them, despite being outnumbered, the French Empire had knights of unmatched renown, which were waiting for their chance at revenge for Normandy. These knights, on their way to attack the Vannin force on the beaches at the command of their Empress Agatha, tore old men and boys from their homes to fight, bloating the attacking force to 62,000. Emperor Alistair, catching wind of this from his spymaster, thought quickly and hired 26,000 mercenaries to sail to Evreux, a number of miles away. Ultimately, they were unnecessary, for even outnumbered and after 4 days of fighting, the brave host of Vannonia rallied by their liege and sent the shamed French army home, even their honored knights of renown. In September of that year, the Empire of Denmark, finally recovered from years of internal conflict and fully Christianized, set its sight outward and declared war upon Vannonia, taking advantage of the monumental war it was involved with. In a desperate bid to end the war with France as quickly as possible and prevent a Dane host landing on the Isles, Emperor Alistair V employed a similar strategy to those of his forebears during the Brige War, and laid ruthless siege to any further areas he occupied. The first of the Danes began to march through the lowlands with 5,000 men in November, simply a forward force, occupying land as they went. The recovered army of the French Empire began to assault Vannin siege parties near Paris, hoping to beat the Vannin sieges to completion, interrupting their strategy and forcing them to withdraw from the war to deal with the threat of the Danes. In order to beat the French, Alistair V would need to mount a huge double assault on the two areas he occupied, sacrificing tens of thousands of lives in order to do so. For if he failed in this endeavor, he would either lose the coast to the Danes or lose the rest of the coast to the French. His great strategic gamble commenced, first combining his armies of 17,000 Vannin knights with his mercenary force of 15,000 fighting men, and marching north into the lowlands to deal with Denmark, while his castles held off the French for the time being. Recruiting along the way, the Vannin force held 42,000 by the end of their march. Emperor Ragnvald Laxson was leading a siege of roughly 7,000 men when the 42,000-man army arrived in Bruges. He bet on Vannonia being too occupied to respond when he declared his opportunistic war, mimicking his pagan ancestors. Alistair V defeated them swiftly, and chased down another force of 12,000 barbaric Danes after the battle, cutting them down deep in the Danish lowlands. Emperor Alistair V then discovered a fresh army of 31,000 Danes awaiting in the neighboring duchy of Hanau. After a hard battle involving flaming bales of hay, they were defeated and sent back to the frigid realm where they descended from. The next month, this force returned to relieve their castles in the south, still outnumbered at 16,000, but angry, and attacked the force of 27,000 laying siege to the occupied lowland castles of Vannin. The French forces, unprepared for a battle, then fled, so Vannonia gave chase and met them in Zealand, though the French maneuvered such that a battle was avoided. It was here that something dreadfully strange occurred. While the armies of Vannin and France were occupied in the north, near Zealand, the Emperor of the Danes, Ragnvald Laxson, died, and a civil war began for the throne, with his brother, Oscar Laxson, taking the western marches of the empire, and instead of fighting his other brother, Alfred, or his uncle Karl, he laid claim to the same region that Vannin and France were warring over, declaring war on the both of them. The French army was no longer able to retreat as a 30,000-strong army of Danes came marching back down the coast, and the confused Vannin army assumed this was Denmark breaking their peace, demanding blood. The Battle of Zealand consisted of over 60,000 souls on all sides, and lasted a full 24 hours, leaving no clear victor. This conflict would be known as the 3 Years' War, or more famously the Dover War, after the Strait of Dover where most of the claimed land touched. This war would be remembered as a war that Vannonia very nearly lost, and of the casualties between the three combatants, well over 130,000 dead could be counted, not including the countless common folk who perished during this clash of titans. By the end of it, Emperor Alistair V had spent thousands of ducats, but by successfully achieving his war goal, increased the realm's income 12-fold by way of sea traffic, going from 2 ducats a month to 25. The Dover War also set the stage for a decades-long three-way rivalry between Vannonia, France, and Denmark. In the east, the Krakow Federation consumed the Magyarország, and converted to Catholicism, thus becoming the gateway to the west, whose territory stretched from the Gulf of Danzig to the Black Sea. This would have proved a direct challenge to the Mongol hordes of the past, but with the death of Temujin the Victorious and the ascension of his son Yegu the Victorious, they converted to the Orthodox faith and ceased much of their conquest for a time at the behest of their new church. A major acquisition for them, the conversion of the Mongols proved to be invaluable to orthodoxy. Meanwhile, Vannini's recovery from the Dover War was spectacular, and Emperor Alexander V had built up such a rapport with his vassals that in 1275 he could call upon a maximum of 111,000 men at any given time, the largest army the realm, and indeed the rest of Europe, had seen for centuries.